The Swimmer is a 1968 film written and directed by the husband and wife team of Eleanor and Frank Perry. It is based on a 1964 short story of the same name by John Cheever. The movie stars Burt Lancaster as Ned Merrill, with a searing performance by Janice as Shirley Abbott. When I first saw the movie in 1968, I knew pretty much everything and felt that I was on my way to success and happiness. I was certain that I would avoid the potholes in life's superhighway. As I recollect, I thought the movie was pop psychology pablum. Now, some 50 years later, I have a different take. The movie is set in a rich neighborhood that could be on the outskirts of many American cities. We see Ned, in nothing but a square-cut bathing suit, wandering in the woods, until he comes upon some neighbors sitting by their oversized swimming pool. He shares a distant but polite conversation with them, yet he is noticeably distracted by their swimming pool. Soon Ned decides that he would spend the afternoon swimming across the county by going from one neighbor's pool to another. In fact, he has the route mapped out in his head pool by pool. As he begins his journey, he meets a young Julian Hooper, played by Janet Landgard, wearing a 1960-era bikini. He recognizes her as having been a babysitter for his two daughters, and she recounts how she always had a crush on Ned, who seemed oblivious to her childhood fantasy. Yet Ned seems to have a fantasy of his own. Several important things begin to happen that foreshadow the rest of Ned's swimming tour. For example, Ned has a curiously naive and blank look on his face, as though he was certain he was going to avoid the potholes in life's superhighway. He speaks of his daughters as though they still need a babysitter, and he invites Julie and to his house to once again take care of them. She is confused at his response. Ned and Julian spend some time together, but Ned crosses a subtle boundary with Julie and she runs away. Ned is perplexed but continues on his journey. At each swimming pool, Ned is greeted by acquaintances who often react to Ned in ways that he does not understand. Today, their comments would be called microaggressions. Back then we would have called them passive-aggressive, meant to express anger or disgust toward Ned without violating norms of politeness. Yet Ned ignores the comments and goes to the next pool. Along the way, Ned meets a boy who has been left alone by his parents, and Ned, being a good and caring father and adult, takes the boy under his wing and teaches him to swim in an empty pool. It almost leads to disaster, but Ned saves the day. As Ned slowly begins to absorb the distrust, anger, and judgments of his neighbors, his face begins to be less a blank slate and more human. Ned eventually swims into the pool of actress Shirley Abbott, played by Janice, who brings well-honed iciness, undergirded by anger, in her interactions with the swimmer. We find out that she had had an affair with Ned, and in a flashback we learn that Ned left her bed only to join his wife and daughters at a black tie event. She lashes out at Ned, saying she never loved him, and his hurt becomes palpable. During this intensely painful scene, Ned begins to complain of being cold, even with the heat of the bright summer afternoon sun, but Ned must continue, and he ends up at a public pool where he is humiliated by ordinary people. We learn that Ned, in spite of his trappings of wealth, left a trail of unpaid bills, and that his daughters jeer at him and think him a loser. Worse, he finds that his two darlings have had their own encounters with the law. Look for a cameo by the pre-surgery Joan Rivers as a horny neighborhood busybody. As Ned continues to shudder from his coldness, he visits a neighbor's new pool and finds that a treasured hot dog/popcorn cart that he owned was sold by his wife, and he becomes angry and agitated. Now Ned is shivering in the sun, aggressively blotted out by storm clouds. In the final scene, as Ned arrives at his home, only to find it abandoned and in disrepair. Ned's tears mix with the rain and he ends up on his knees, his whole body trembling in sorrow and fear. Burt Lancaster, an actor most remembered for tough guy roles, fully captures Ned's growing realizations about his failures. He morphed convincingly from a naive blank slate to someone grappling with the failures of his life. Janice embodies the jilted other woman with fire. The cinematography featured intense colors, the kinds that have long faded from the movies. The beautiful soundtrack score was composed by a then unknown Marvin Hamlish. In the 1950s and 60s, there were several movies that billed the downfall of successful middle and upper middle class men through flashbacks, for example, The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit and The Snows of Kilimanjaro. The conceit of The Swimmer is that the character has no memories to be contained in flashbacks, rather his backstory picture is sometimes grotesquely and angrily painted by the comments of those whose swimming pools he borrows for the afternoon. And it works, and it is a devastating reveal of a flawed man. It is certainly all too clear by the end of the movie that Ned was sidetracked on the road to success and happiness, through events of his own making. That certainly rings true for me. I highly recommend The Swimmer if you need a mirror for some reflection. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Join at patreon.com/Atlanta Music Critic.